I guess that my bio is really short. I'm a Grails hacker. I see some familiar faces. I'm a Grails hacker and a barefoot runner. You can ask me about either one of those two. Grails, barefoot running. Anyway, so today's talk is going to be about specifically how to authenticate a Grails application with Google App Engine. But the generic part really is that Google App Engine supports OpenID authentication. Supports both OpenID and OAuth now. So really what I'm going to be talking about is how to do OpenID authentication for your Grails application. But I will be covering a little bit about the background of the implementation that is being used, which is OpenID for Java, which would really make it possible for you to authenticate any Java application using Google accounts. More specifically, actually, since Google Accounts API supports OpenID, it means that you can use your Gmail login or your Google Apps login, your Google Apps domains, to authenticate yourself against your Google App Engine application, or against any application actually. Because you can have an application that's hosted on Amazon EC2, for example, and still use the Google Accounts APIs to authenticate via the OpenID protocol. The reason for that is because OpenID is an open protocol and it supports the idea of a federated login, meaning that we can authenticate externally or single sign-on on an external path. Okay. So I'm going to bring up this little page from Google's site. Let me get on the Google guest. Yeah. So I was going to do slides, but I needed to do my slides. I prefer just to like show a code window, hack a bit, and show you guys how to hack it. So this little, I guess, sequence diagram. Size this one. So this little sequence diagram that we see here, I think everybody can see that, yeah? So this little sequence diagram actually shows us exactly what happens when we do an OpenID authentication. Now, OpenID authentication is essentially is a very simple process. What you have is, you have the server, which you want to authenticate against, and then of course you have your own server or machine that you want to authenticate from. So you have the machine that has the OpenID credential, or rather the usernames and passwords on them, and then you have the machine from which you would like to authenticate. Now, OpenID is meant to be a machine-to-machine protocol. So typically what happens is you have two machines talking to each other in order to authenticate a person. And the whole the whole layer of back and forth is encrypted with TLS, transport level security. So it's an encrypted conversation that goes on between the servers for deciding whether or not this particular person with these credentials that are being presented should or should not be allowed to log in. So this little sequence diagram explains it nicely. Point number one says request user sign in. So this is the point at which the user actually says, boom, I would like to sign in on this web page. So they come to the web page, they are presented with the options for signing in. In our case, on the web page, they would be presented with sign in with Google, a little Google button that says sign in with Google. They click on the sign in with Google button, and at this point, they are redirected to the Google page. But between when they click this, I would like to sign in with Google, and the point at which they are redirected to Google, there's a couple of things which need to happen. The first of those is you need to perform a discovery on the Google address, because of the way that OpenID works. The moment I present OpenID, we first need to find out where the endpoint, and this is an important point, the endpoint for the authentication is supposed to happen. Because although we have two servers which are supposed to be authenticating, because it's a federated login system, it means that it's almost like a DNS discovery. I don't say, I would like to authenticate to this machine with this IP address at this location. I say, this is my username, or this is the provider, this is their URL. Please find out for me what the authentication endpoint is that I'm supposed to be using. And this is the point at which we discover the endpoint. And again, this is machine to machine. It happens either in a library or we can code it manually. We are returned an XRDS document. XRDS is just a specific formatted document. XRD is document which contains information about the login. Point 6 here basically shows us being redirected. Now, there is some parts about OAuth here, which I'm not going to be talking about OAuth today. I'm only going to be talking about OpenID. You're redirected to the Google sign-in page, and some of you may or may not have seen this before. If, for example, you try to use Google Docs, you're redirected to the Google sign-in page first, and then you actually get into it. Try to use Gmail, you get to the Google sign-in page first, and that Google sign-in page is actually the same federated sign-in page that will be presented to all the users who are using, for example, OpenID for authentication. And we'll get to a little bit of a demo later on. Now, once you've actually gone to the Google site, and you've signed in, you will then be redirected back to wherever. But obviously, in this process, there is some additional information which has to be shared back and forth. One of those being that Google, on their side, or the OpenID provider on their side, needs to know, once this person has been authenticated, where am I supposed to send them back to? What is the return URL? If you've done stuff like PayPal or payment gateway applications before, it's the same type of deal. Once you've been redirected to the third party's web page, once you're done there, they need to know, where do I send this person back to? Now, all this information, of course, you end up sending along with your request, and there are a whole bunch of these parameters, and they're all documented. Fortunately, since we're going to be using the OpenID for Java library, we don't need to know all of this stuff. This stuff is all going to be hidden from us. We'll be using, and since we're going to be using it in Grails via the Grails plugin, it's going to be at an even higher level of abstraction, so we're going to have to worry about as little as possible. Now, the reason I'm digging down into the dirty details a little bit is really to show you two things. One, how easy it is to do this stuff with Grails, and two, how much of an abstraction we are actually getting when we do this. Otherwise, you just think, okay, it's just going back and forth. But there's actually a lot of stuff under the hood that needs to happen in order for all of the bits that I'm going to be showing you for that to take place. So, moving on. How are we going to actually be doing the signing? We're going to be using this open source package for Java called OpenID for Java. And this is going to give us our authentication. This is going to show us how to actually get in and authenticate against the authenticate a Grails application. Now, Grails specifically has at least three or more distinct authentication libraries. I'm not going to be talking about all of them. I'm going to be talking about one in particular today, which is the OpenID for Java plugin. There's another one which I use actually more than OpenID for Java, which is the CG one, which is actually now Spring Security. If there are any Spring programmers here, you're familiar with Spring Security. There's a Spring Security plugin as well. But Spring Security has a lot of stuff in it. And I don't want to get distracted by all the additional bits that are in Spring Security, when all I really want to do is talk about authenticating using Google accounts. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking only about the OpenID Java plugin. Sorry, the OpenID Grails plugin. Okay. Let's move straight on. So what I've already done, and I just want to confirm that this actually is working. I was having a conflict earlier with one of my. Okay. I've got a little application which is already deployed. That it's actually up and running. I just redeployed it because I realized that there was a problem with the OpenID for Java library. So as with all things, these libraries sometimes have bugs in them, and I ended up having deploying a version with a bug in it. Okay, so this happens sometimes. This actually is the timeout on the server side. And the reason this is happening is because the Grails application actually loads a lot of Spring beans into its Spring context internally, and the whole process takes longer than the timeout limit, 30-second timeout limit that the App Engine has on requests. So it has just exceeded that timeout limit, and that is the reason why I've just been keeping. So I'm going to leave that alone for a while. I can always run this locally. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to the Google Tech User Group guys. Chris, is Chris in the room? Chris, can you keep time for me, please? Can you keep time for me? Can you call out when I have 15 minutes left, please? Can you call out when I have 15 minutes left? Because I'm just going to keep going. Okay. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with bare bones Grails application. Can everybody see the screen? I hope everybody can see the bottom. If not everybody can see the bottom, I can raise it a little bit. I guess I should. Let me raise this a little bit and possibly also. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new Grails application. I'm going to call it, well, I want to call it the same as the other one. Let me just call it the same as the other one. Actually, I shouldn't do that here. So Grails, if anybody has used Grails before, then you're pretty familiar with how many Grails developers are actually in the room, people who are actually using Grails. Rails? Ruby on Rails? Java developers? Everyone. Java developers? Okay. Everybody who's not using Java? How many developers? Okay, all right. That's good. I thought I had to adjust the talk for the marketing people and sales people. Okay, so this rapid prototyping tool, Grails, which uses the idea of code over convention, convention over configuration. Essentially, what we're going to do now is I'm going to generate a new application skeleton. So I'm using Grails create app Quotica, which is my little application. And it's going to go away and do a whole bunch of things, and it's going to create the layout for an application, a Grails application. So maybe I should also then, if not too many people are using Grails, should I also maybe quickly explain exactly what Grails is. So Java, the Java virtual machine, has traditionally had one language which you could use to program for it. It was a statically typed language, and that language is Java. But Java is really just a language that you use that is then compiled by a compiler which generates JVM bytecode. Some smart people figured out, why don't we just write other languages and do what we want in terms of making them dynamic, for example, and then still generate JVM bytecode from that. So it's essentially a developer productivity tool. So Groovy is one of these languages. It's called a dynamic language for the JVM, a dynamic language for the Java runtime. And the whole idea behind dynamic languages for the Java runtime is you can essentially have the flexibility of something like Python or Perl, because these are all dynamic languages, the flexibility of those, but you have, at the same time as you have the flexibility, you have the speed of the JVM. Because Java, the JVM executes faster than Python and PHP, for example. You take a little bit of execution penalty, but it's still quite quick. Faster still than these other languages. And the benefit, of course, you get is between Groovy and Java, since everything compiles down to bytecode, you can continue to use your traditional libraries like the Apache, the Jakarta project, Java archive, etc., within your Groovy project. Now, Grails is a project that is built on top of Groovy and Java, a mix of both, that gives you the ability to quickly generate Java EE web applications or web applications that will deploy into a Java EE application container like Tomcat or JBoss. Right. So now that we're inside Kotica, we're going to install some plugins. The first plugin that we want to install is the App Engine plugin. And this is going to go away. It's going to either hit the cache locally on my machine, or it's going to have to go and download it. Oops. Let me export the App Engine environment quickly. Let's see how we're doing on this application. Okay. Do you want to update this version? Say yes. Do you want to use JPA or JDO? I like JPA, so we'll use JPA. Do you want to upgrade this version? Just say yes. Sometimes it throws its toys out of the cart like it did just now, because there's still some bugs, and you end up having to rerun both of these. Install plugin commands. JPA. Okay, so hopefully now it's managed to do it. Let's see. Check our application properties. Notice that we have both plugins defined. Right. Okay. So now we should be close to actually having an application that can be deployed. We're still getting this error on the server. Okay, no worries. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, since this application, the version numbering on App Engine has to be integers. So I'm going to first do a set version, Grail set version 1, to change the version number of the application to 1. And then I'm going to say Grail's App Engine package. For today's demonstration, I'm not going to be using any of the Google. I'm not going to be storing the data inside the engine. So JPA is not really required. Okay, so hopefully now in our target board directory, we have a Java EE layout that would be in line with what would be required by the App Engine, the Google App Engine. Okay, so the one thing I forgot, supposed to be, I didn't update my App Engine. So Google App Engine, of course, requires that you have this configuration XML descriptor file, which contains the application name, version number, and some other system properties. Now, these have all been set in line with what we want for our development environment. So I'm going to go ahead and package this. So I'm going to say Grail's App Engine. Once I've packaged it, I'm going to have to deploy it. And that will take as long as 10 minutes left. Okay. 10 minutes left. Okay, right. Okay, so quickly then. I've got a locally deployed, I've got 10 minutes left, right? So I'm going to have to wrap this up quickly and still have time for Q&A. I've got a locally deployed application, but the Java libraries are a little bit messed up, so it gives some erroneous results on the authentication. But to give you an idea of where we are headed, so I'm going to be running this locally on my machine. I'm going to connect to it locally using using my browser. Let's just say this. So one of the problems that I have with OpenID is the whole idea that everybody needs to know their OpenID. I really dislike the idea of people needing to know HTTP URL, which is essentially what OpenID requires of us, that we know this long HTTP URL, which is essentially our OpenID. I'm much more in favor of some of the more recent design patterns that people have decided to employ for working with OpenID. One of those is the idea of never even asking the user on your own sign-in page. So if you've ever seen a lot of these sign-in pages, they will generate an OpenID URL field for you with a little OpenID icon on the left-hand side, and then ask you to authenticate. I don't know if I can find something. I can find something that shows us how to know that Yahoo still uses the old form OpenID. Ooh, Yahoo. Okay, so this is our local application running now. It's already attempted to. Is this the one that I want to look at? No, this is the one. So this is the local host application that I've installed, I've deployed, by just basically doing the Grails run app. This is what I've got. I've got the running application here now. And on here, I have one thing only. I have a Google button that basically says, sign in with Google. Now, this is the best way that I find to actually manage user interface design. Don't ask the user to enter like unnecessary stuff, especially for OpenID. Never ask the user for their OpenID URL. Hide from the user the fact that they're actually using OpenID. You should never hear the word OpenID. They should just know, here's the Google login badge. I want to log in with my Google credentials. So what happens when I hit this? A lot of stuff happening in the background. I just actually did a discovery of the OpenID URL. So if I go back and we look at the source of this page, right? So specifically on this HTML form, notice that the action is a local URL called OpenID/login. So in that OpenID/login servlet, what I'm going to be doing is take this. Now, this right here, I don't know if you can see this, but this right here is very important. This little ID is actually the Google authentication endpoint, where we do all sorts of OpenID discovery or Google accounts authentication discovery against. The 08 ID, google.com accounts, and passing all of this OpenID credentials into that URL actually gives us this. But I don't want to. So this is fairly easy to actually do. The whole point here is abstract all of that into a one button, which when I click it, it takes me immediately, and you can see the URL. I've been taken to Google sign-in page. I'm going to say don't remember me, and I'm going to hit sign in. Now this will probably come back with an error. Okay, it's coming back with an error, but the reason it's coming back with an error is not because I wasn't properly signed in. There's a problem with the version of my Java library, so it's not, the protocol is broken right now. But essentially, this is how easy it is to authenticate. You basically have a single button on there, you press it, and all of the stuff that I was talking about happens in the background. I don't think this application is going to come up. Probably just as well, because I think we are out of time. Let's have a little bit of time. guess I can ask you questions. Any questions? Ask me anything about OpenID or web learning.
Regarding that application login,
Right.
so if you log into Google or with multiple OpenID accounts,
Right.
would it automatically choose?
No, it won't. So typically what you would want to do is you want to have a badge for each OpenID provider. So you might want to have your Yahoo badge, your Google badge. Then because Google accounts also supports OAuth, you could either have an OAuth badge which automatically takes the guy to Google, or you can have an OAuth badge which takes the guy to Twitter, but you don't call it OAuth badge. You call it sign in with Twitter. Twitter actually uses OAuth. So once you actually implemented your OAuth authentication in the backend, you create a badge, say Google sign in, which is actually using OpenID. Yahoo sign in badge, which when you click on it, takes them to the Yahoo authentication page. Twitter badge, when they click on it, uses OAuth to take them to the Twitter account, to the Twitter authentication page, etc.
So what happens if people already logged into Twitter? Would you be able to authenticate make a account or access already authenticate?
No, because OAuth, so again, OAuth is a resource authorization rather than simply a pure authentication. So OAuth doesn't just authenticate; it actually gives you, it allows you to access a very specific resource, and whether or not the website is allowed to. Let me put it a different way. OAuth is a way for you, the user, to authorize a third-party website to access a very particular atom of private information from one of your websites. So if you want to give, say, some funky Twitter aggregator just access to a particular part of your tweets, for example, I'm making this up, then you can basically go to this aggregator's website, click on the button where you have to authorize them. They will take you to Twitter. Twitter will ask you, this is the stuff these guys want from you. Do you want to share this? At that point, if you've already signed into your Twitter account, you can say yes, no.